Hello again, YouTubers, all in with SpongeBob 101 back here again on the SpongeBob channel. Today we are reviewing Kamp Koral episode number 16, First and Last Aid and Night of the Living Stench. The synopsis states, Camp Master Krabs finally hires a camp nurse, but she needs to dedicate all her time and effort to keeping SpongeBob safe. Also, when all the campers try to win the stinkiest camp in the forest award, Squidward has to fend for his life to stay clean. Let's begin. First and Last Aid is a pretty good example of a slapstick humor episode based on pure pain and suffering. The episode begins with a bunch of instances where SpongeBob is injured, and instead of allowing him to have medical treatment, Mr. Krabs demands that he and any other injured camper just walks it off. The first injury arises with Sandy's flaming ball serve, where Mr. Krabs actually presses SpongeBob's injuries, causing a little theme song whistle to play, which was cool but still ouch, right? The second injury occurs during a simple game of badminton where SpongeBob manages to slice himself through the net, and Patrick gets the racket stuck around his neck too. How did that happen? I don't know. Then SpongeBob and Patrick engage in the kelp luge, which is frankly absolutely unsafe for kids. They do smash into Larry the Lobster, causing Larry to lose his shell, and all three of them eventually land in a dumpster. There is a short cameo of Gary, which was nice, but again, walk it off, right? The final straw comes where SpongeBob dislodges one of his legs and Mr. Krabs uses ketchup. Yeah, like the condiment, to stick it back, obviously being too cheapskate to hire a real nurse. But Mrs. Puff doesn't stand for it anymore and orders for a real nurse, which comes literally immediately. It's Nurse Helga. You might remember her from the checkup episode in season 11. We then get to see the long-abandoned first aid cabin where Nurse Helga reveals that she was somehow involved in the Clubnodian Wars, a reference to Clubnod from the Patrick Star Show, of course. This is when things get really silly. SpongeBob shows up in a very annoying manner, asking first for a band-aid without being injured just for his collection, and he is shooed out. He returns in the form of a Rubik's Cube as a result of falling into the trash compactor. Which is pretty crazy, but, you know, Rubik's Cube, okay? This continues with sea urchin stuck in his back pores, and eventually Helga decides that it's better to just stop the injuries from the get-go, so she follows SpongeBob to keep him safe. This obviously doesn't work. Providing a safety rope while SpongeBob cycles on a tightrope is not effective if it is not tied to an unmovable object. So we then hop over to the baseball or softball pitch, another new locale in Kamp Koral where SpongeBob is wrapped in bubble wrap to Patrick's delight because Patrick likes to pop those bubbles. But due to unfortunate circumstances, the ball ends up hitting Helga in the head, injuring her again. So in a change of strategy now, Helga forces SpongeBob to play thinking games in the form of chess, which technically should be safe, but the whole wall of weaponry behind her comes crashing down once SpongeBob makes his first move, which is pretty silly in my opinion. We then get a return to the foothill of Porpoise Peak, where this time SpongeBob is supposed to chant his mantra of no fun, but in true nonsensical fashion, the sound waves cause a rock slide, once again obliterating Helga. So, Helga eventually awakes in a room covered in sponge. This reminds me of the solitary confinement cell Mrs. Puff was in back in Doing Time in Season 3. But anyways, SpongeBob finally points out the obvious. He's a sponge, so he technically can't get injured. Helga, on the other hand, is a injury magnet. Can you imagine how Helga would have felt upon that realization? Wow. However, SpongeBob does help Helga to discover fun by bouncing around the cabin when Mr. Krabs eventually walks in for treatment. This time, Mr. Krabs got injured, and what better way to end off the episode with a prescription to walk it off? The plot gets a 8 out of 10. There was a lot of humor packed into this one, which was the main draw for me. I found the ways in which Nurse Helga's overprotectiveness backfired on her particularly hilarious. And the moral of the story is, you can have fun and be safe at the same time, or you should have fun and be safe at the same time, unless you're a sponge, in which case you can have fun whenever you want. Animation gets a 9 out of 10. I really like the variety in this episode. The luge, Rubik's Cube SpongeBob, razor sharp checkers, and SpongeBob in bubble wrap were some of my favorite scenes in this one. Unique characteristics gets a 8 out of 10. We got the involvement of a side character that seems to have faded into obscurity, along with small references to both the main series and the Patrick Star Show. The meat poster in the first aid cabin, and even a short with Gary, on top of the new locales in Kamp Koral. In total, I'll give first and last 8 25 out of 30. Moving on to Night of the Living Stench, I'm just gonna start by saying that I didn't like this episode in the same way I didn't like the Ballad of Filthy Muck from season 12 of the main series. Being filthy and disgusting is probably the worst kind of plot a SpongeBob episode can have, if not one of the worst in my opinion. The episode begins perfectly fine, with SpongeBob forcing all of the other campers to wait in line while he takes his time to make sure he's sparkly clean in the shower. Things do take a nosedive once Patrick reveals he never bathes. Really brings back memories from Battle of Bikini Bottom in season 5. Unfortunately, younger SpongeBob doesn't hold steadfastly to his appreciation of the clean, immediately caving to the argument that if no one can smell you, people don't think you exist. Which is a patently ridiculous argument considering that anyone with eyes can see if you exist, so no one needs to smell you, and no one needs to smell a bad smell to know you're there. Squidward then finds the both of them soaking in trash in the dingy cabin, where we have a quick jingle on how they're stinkers. That was genuinely funny, but still, how revolting. Squidward, being sane, reports them to Camp Master Krabs, but instead of doing the right thing, Krabs realizes he can cut costs by not paying for soap, and then goes a step further by awarding SpongeBob and Patrick the prestigious Stinky Badge for outstanding stinkiness. He doesn't stop there though. He proposes that if every camper got stinky together, Kamp Koral could win the Stinkiest Camp in the Forest award. So the next few scenes are absolutely abhorrent, with the campers working on their stench and SpongeBob and Patrick doing stink checks. Sandy even paints her tail to look like that of a skunk. Meanwhile, Kevin notices Squidward taking a shower and tattles on him. Squidward rightly points out that he's too civilized and walks away, but SpongeBob, Patrick, and Sandy begin chasing him like they were zombies. Really, this gets more ridiculous, okay? Squidward manages to repel SpongeBob and Patrick with his soap and Sandy with his towel and barricades himself in the cabin. I love the part where he does slam on the floor panel and launches Stinky Patrick out of there. It was pretty funny, and Squidward comes up with defenses for the cabin against the stinky mob. Plus, he combines his beloved clarinet with industrial strength soap to create his new soap blaster, which is also pretty cool. So night falls and the mob of loony campers start charging at the cabin, so it's time to go into battle mode, with Squidward digging in. Patrick states that everyone should let a unprofessional handle it, and he consumes an onion to power up his bad breath and blows a hole into the roof and enters the cabin, only to be cleaned up by the cleaning supply set up. Squidward pretends to surrender to make his escape, only to clean up SpongeBob and Sandy before floating away with a bunch of balloons. Reminds me of the movie Up. But unfortunately, the camper's smelly spitwad attack causes Squidward to lose control and crash. Sandy and gang manage to track Squidward down using her new stinkometer. Yeah, that's a thing, it's like a giant nose. It looks like something you get from the Palace of Pranks. Squidward lures the stinkers to the lake and everyone ends up falling in, losing their filth as the sun rises. However, Squidward somehow absorbs all the gunk and is awarded the Stinkiest Camper in the Forest award. The main takeaway is please don't follow a crowd blindly and cave to peer pressure, which is fairly decent as a message, but still, this is such a crazy episode. Wow. Plot gets a 3 out of 10. The only redeeming features of this was the valiant fight Squidward put up against the loony stinker mob. Where are the grown-ups, specifically Mrs. Puff, when you need them, right? Animation gets 7 out of 10 because at least the scenes were fairly creative and Squidward's battle was awesome. Minus points for the grossness though. Unique characteristics gets a 4 out of 10. Once again, the main redeeming feature of this episode is that Squidward actually puts up an independent fight against a mob of craziness, holding steadfast to his value of cleanliness, which I wholeheartedly identify with. I did find the stinker jingle pretty memorable though, but nonetheless, Night of the Living Stench gets 14 out of 30 from me. Please remember not to be a stinker, folks. So that's our review of episode 16. Let me know what you thought about these two episodes in the comments box below. Make sure to subscribe, like, and I'll see you guys again in the next video for more Kamp Koral reviews. Till then, see ya!